The important thing is someone's job is to watch out for those indicators. What you find when a company misses an inflection point, they knew, but the knowledge was scattered across the organization in 1,000 little people's heads. If you had put the whole picture together, you would have seen it. But if it's all distributed, you can't. So the idea is, let's agree on some critical time zero events. Let's set up our indicator early warning system. And this doesn't have to be hugely expensive and elaborate, and people will try to sell you a whole bill of goods about that. It doesn't have to be that big a deal. Okay. Now the next logical question you will ask me is, well, how do I pick a time zero event, right? I mean, that makes sense. So here's the way I do it. Pick 2 uncertainties. 2 things that are a big deal for your company. Anybody want to volunteer? Their company, two big uncertainties. Yeah, go ahead.
So we print content.
We
print content.
Okay.
Like books.
Uh-huh.
And there's a shift to either audible or digital.
Okay. Okay. So print. One case of that scenario, print continues to dominate. Because remember, it's not a given that it's going to go away. Remember all the fuss about ebooks some years ago? Well, it turns out all that fuss was driven by the fact that just like Uber rides, ebooks were being heavily subsidized. They were not being priced at market prices. And so of course consumers bought ebooks, they were half the price. Once ebooks normalized in terms of price, guess what? We kind of like paper books. So print continues, or we have a big transition in format, distribution format. And that could be Audible, digital, 3D, who knows what that is, but some kind of major transition. So we can go with slow transition. Call it rapid switch. Now what you've seen is we've got now 4 quite different futures we would want to be preparing for. So the next assignment I would give if we were doing this workshop for real is I'd say, okay, if it's print continues and the transition is slow, this is probably for, evolution, let's say what evolution would be, our business model remains, and I'll call it conventional competition. So that's essentially the future state that's most like today, right? So if that was our time zero event, what we'd be looking for is the events that suggest things aren't changing all that fast, right? Now, really different if the transition is slow, but the transition in format, right, means that in a time zero event there might be something like 60% of the market switches. So 60% of all content consumed switches to this other format. If I were looking at photography, for example, today we take more pictures per day than have been taken in the entire history of humankind. They're just not taken on physical devices with chemicals involved. They're taken on digital things, and because it's super cheap and it doesn't cost you anything particularly, you take ridiculous numbers of pictures. But that would be a 60% market switches. And again, what you'd want to be looking for, if that was your time zero event, you'd want to be looking at what cohorts are doing this. How are those 10-year-olds consuming content? How are the form factors emerging? We've had a lot of fuss about digital, but digital for many applications is a very unsatisfying form factor. If you could layer 3-dimensionality on digital, if you could start to build in, the ability to sort of reach out and touch something. They've got things called haptic technology right now, which not only puts you in a visual 3D world, they actually make you feel and touch things like a 3D world. It's pretty incredible. So if print continues, but it's kind of a rapid paced moving, what you then want to do is you want to have an accelerated launch schedule, let's say. So we're going to continue to focus on print, but probably our launches are going to be faster. And so what you're preparing for there is, how do I get as fast as possible so that even if it's still in print, I can now do, maybe I did 4 a year, now I need to be able to do 8 or 12 a year, right? Because the market demand is going to keep up and they demand that, right? And then the most radical of all is the transition in format happens, a very rapid switch, and this is kind of the nuclear option, right? And there, probably what you're looking at is, if you see this happening, you may not be able to do it yourself. You may need to make an acquisition. You may need to get into that space as fast as you possibly can without taking the time to build it yourself. That may be what happens. But that would be an example. So, as you've seen, we did this, what, 10 minutes? Very quickly, you can hone in on 4 quite distinct futures. Now, strategically, and I'll come back to you in just a sec, quite strategically, what you would like to do is pick a few things that are going to be robust to all of those scenarios, and then have your eye open to what might need to change in those different scenarios. So I hope that wasn't too long an answer, but you can do this. I mean, this is not something that requires trained rocket scientists to pull off. And what it does is it forces the organization to at least start having that conversation.